This is going to be a little improvised video, um, just about my thoughts on kind of Europe, the European Union, and what I see as being the future of Europe over the next couple of decades. The way I see it, there are three Europes at the moment. There's what I shall call the establishment. That's the current ruling order of Europe, the European Union, um, the mainstream parties of the European countries, and kind of the more dominant business or corporations operating in Europe of European origin. There is there's the established Europe, and there are two new Europes coming up that are opposed to the establishment. The first is quite young. In the bulk of it is quite young. Its galvanisation is extremely recent and has come about as a result of the economic crisis and the crisis with the euro. And it's a broadly left-wing movement. It ranges from the centre left to the extreme left. And that encompasses the Indignados, the Social Democrats, the non-mainstream Social Democrats, I should say, the Communists, Maoists, Stalinists, Anarchists, and just anybody who's kind of protesting against capitalism, really. So I'm gonna. It's a bit inaccurate, but I'm just gonna call this the anti-capitalist Europe, though not all elements are anti-capitalist, but just as a broad, simple thing. The other new European movement is older, but again that's galvanised fairly recently as probably a reaction to multiculturalism and the war on terror and things like that, and that is mainly of the far right. That's your British national parties, your Geert Wilders, whatever his name is, your EDLs and various movements across Europe, your Breiviks. But let me stress that I don't feel that Breivik is representative of the entire far right. I think we should be precise in our analysis of all things, and I think that while there would be many members of various organisations willing to commit petty attacks, I think that probably most of them are sensible enough to realise that large-scale terrorist attacks aren't helpful for their movement. Now, the established Europe is falling to pieces, and it's being attacked on two fronts. One is from the anti-capitalist Europe, and that is over the Eurozone crisis, the NATO wars, the basically just the economic system and the economic hardships that people have been facing. The far right is attacking the ideas of multiculturalism, immigration, the Eurozone to the extent that it clashes with their nationalist ideals, and the anti-capitalist Europe, I obviously oppose and see as probably responsible for quite a few problems. So I think over the next 10 years we're going to see this established Europe basically doing everything it can to perpetuate itself, to try and remain on top, to remain in control, and within that we'll have a struggle between these two new Europes, these two new pan-European mass movements. They'll be struggling against each other as well as the establishment. Now, I'm just going to change the subject quickly. to some of my feelings on immigration. This isn't a subject that the anti-capitalist left tends to struggle, to cover that much. Mostly they tend to talk about racism exposed to people who have immigrated to European countries, um, and kind of human rights issues, and some human rights abuses that occur with immigrants that happen to them on their way to Europe or England. Um, Now, I think basically the left isn't opposed to immigration, the idea of immigration per se. We don't want to close the borders. I think, well, my personal view is that immigration is obviously a symptom of capitalism anyway. Um, capitalism creates rich countries and poor countries, and if you have the chance to move from a rich country, from a poor country to a rich country, you're going to take it. It's no, I don't blame anyone for trying. Um, but also, you've got to try and look at it. I mean, I have my own experience because I've been an immigrant. I immigrated to Spain when I was quite young, and I grew up in Spain. And there was a very insular expatriate culture over there, and a lot of people don't mingle with the Spanish, and I can understand why, because there are so many people who speak your own language. It's easier not to learn the language, so that's kind of the way it is. I mean, I know what it's like to be kind of abused by nationalists of the country that you're living in for being an immigrant. um, and it's not easy. It can be quite difficult. And then later, when I grew up, I immigrated back to England because there wasn't much work going on. It's got worse since I've left. And it took me a long time to get used to being back in England. Um, you know, I had quite a hard time sort of adapting for a while, and then I kind of, once I got used to it, it was fine, and I'm happy here. But what that whole experience gave me was a sense of internationalism, because I experienced the Spanish nationalists who were hostile to immigrants, but I also experienced a lot of the people who were immigrants were themselves, extremely nationalistic, and I found that nationalism to be hypocritical, because they complain about people immigrating to England and taking their jobs, but they've immigrated to Spain and they're taking their jobs, and they're saying, oh yeah, but for us it's different because we give business and pay taxes and stuff. In reality, they don't do anything differently to a Pakistani who's moved over to London and has opened up a corner shop. They're exactly the same. So I basically found that whole aspect of nationalism to be completely hypocritical and once put to the test. And that was kind of my experience. So I feel what I've really come away with is I feel very kind of pan-European myself. I feel I like to be called, I like the idea of a United States of Europe and a United Europe. But what the whole EU experience has shown is that it's the way you have to be very careful with building it. It will take a very long time, and it has to be more democratic than, or kind of visibly democratic. It has to. The decisions that are made at an EU level have to be taken at a grassroots level as well. People need consultation. Greater democratic involvement from the whole population of Europe, because the thing is, a lot of these European laws you just hear them out of nothing. People have had no opportunity to discuss these rules to see if they're correct. People, and that's where you get a lot of these Euro myths from ignorance of what's actually going on, because people aren't getting enough information. So you get these Euro myths, and that these stories. EU says that you can't fly a British flag or something. There's a popular one. There's a myth that you can't fly the English flag in England, and it's not true. You can fly the English flag any way you like. And so that's kind of the failure, because to the people of Europe, the European Union is this outside force coming in and affecting people's sovereignty. And then you have the other blunders, because a lot of EU, to build a kind of a united Europe, the countries that become integrated have to become integrated at similar economic levels. I mean, this Greek failure, it was going to happen because Greece wouldn't be able to keep up with Germany and France and Britain, and the capitalism being the way it is, it didn't survive its first recession. I think the European Union as it currently is, over the next 10 or 20 years, will probably change into something quite different. And that decision, the future of the European Union depends on both how the established Europe treats the population, and basically the underlying social struggle between this kind of what I call the anti-capitalist Europe and the far right in Europe. And that's going to determine the future. If the EU acts wisely over the next few years, it'll be able to save itself, kind of remain as a structure, but its character will be defined more by these two new Europes, whichever one becomes more dominant, the dominant opinion amongst people. Or the EU could fall apart, and in which case we're going to see a massive rise in nationalism. European states will become a lot less united and more nationalistic in their approach, in their foreign policy, and in their economic policy, which, I think socially that could be a very damaging thing, and I think that could there will be a lot of strife over that, especially over the whole issue of multiculturalism and things like that. So really, I think over the next few years, everyone in Europe is going to have to sit down and think to themselves, well, what kind of Europe do we want this to be? Or how involved should my country be with the rest of Europe? That's the decisions people are going to have to make, and they will end up coming down on one side or the other. So you've got two growing mass movements that are focusing on Europe and are indigenous of Europe. So one of these two will become predominant over the other. So my advice to all Europeans is, as I said, just sit down and think, what kind of Europe are we trying to create here? Or should we even be bothering to create this united Europe? Think about the future of your own country, of the culture in Europe, of democracy in Europe, and study hard, study all the kind of angles, and try and look at outside opinions as well. Look for how the outside views Europe, and the possibilities for Europe, for Europe's future, and its role in the world. Now, I'm an internationalist, so I don't seek to see Europe dominating other continents like Asia or Africa. But I do feel that Europe could also play an incredible role in helping these different continents develop. Well, I'm just about all out of time, but if you've got any thoughts about Europe, make a video response or drop me a comment. So, thank you.